All right, strap in, everyone. We're going dep on Nietzsche today. Specifically, his Übermensch.
The Superman.
Yeah. You guys gave us a pretty hefty stack of reading material.
We've got academic papers,
Excerpts from Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
even some of Nietzsche's personal notes.
Our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to pull out the really juicy stuff, the mind-blowing parts.
And try to make sense of what this whole Superman idea actually means, for us regular folks.
Yeah, because I think when a lot of people hear Übermensch, they think of...
Like literal Superman.
Yeah, a dude with a cape and laser vision and all that.
Right, exactly. But Nietzsche wasn't really talking about superpowers, like at least not the kind you see in comic books. One of the academic papers you sent actually highlights this. The Übermensch, or OVERMAN, as it's sometimes translated, it's more of a philosophical concept.
Okay, so less about muscles and more about, like, unlocking our potential.
Exactly. But not just physically, right? Mentally, creatively.
Yeah.
Even in terms of how we create meaning in our lives.
Yeah. So not about leaping tall buildings, but about overcoming limitations. But what kind of limitations?
That's where Nietzsche gets really interesting. He was going against the grain, challenging the norms of his time.
Yeah.
Especially what he saw as the shackles of traditional morality, particularly Christian morality. He thought the Übermensch would break free from those constraints.
And he also talked a lot about nihilism.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a huge concern for him. He saw nihilism creeping into society and believed that the Übermensch would reject that too. Instead, they would embrace life's challenges with, like, this joyful, creative spirit.
Okay, now I have to ask about this whole death of God thing.
Okay.
Because the sources keep mentioning it as being, like, super important to the Übermensch idea.
Oh, it's absolutely crucial. It's key to understanding Nietzsche. So he argued that the decline of traditional religious belief, which he called the death of God, it created this crisis of meaning for humanity. People were losing those old anchors of morality and purpose. In Nietzsche, he saw this as both a problem and an opportunity.
And that's where the Übermensch comes in.
Yes, the Übermensch is, in a way, Nietzsche's answer to this crisis. It's about becoming the kind of being who can create their own values and meaning in a world without God, a world without relying on those old traditional systems.
There's a really powerful quote about this in The Gay Science, where Nietzsche describes this death of God moment. It's like, humanity is stepping onto a whole new stage, ready to write a whole new chapter in history.
That's a fantastic way to put it. It's not just about losing something, right? It's about gaining a new kind of freedom, a freedom to create our own values, shape our own destinies. Daunting, sure, but also exhilarating.
Okay, so that's the background. But how do we actually get to this Übermensch state? Is there like a step-by-step guide or roadmap?
Well, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche lays out these famous 3 transformations.
I've heard of those.
Starts with the camel, burdened by tradition, weighed down by all those societal expectations.
Okay, I can relate to that.
Then comes the lion, right? The lion rebels against those burdens, roars its defiance, and seeks liberation. But the true Übermensch, that's represented by the child.
Wait, a child? I thought we were talking about powerful, self-determined individuals.
There's a twist. It's not about brute force or dominance. The child represents innocence, a fresh perspective. It's that ability to create without being limited by preconceived notions, or by those societal norms. That's the kind of creative energy that Nietzsche saw as being so essential for the Übermensch.
Wow. I'm starting to see why this whole concept is so fascinating and also so open to interpretation. It's not a simple answer. It's a whole new way of thinking.
It really is. And that's why it still resonates with people today. We're still grappling with these same questions of meaning, purpose, self-creation, especially in a world that feels like it's constantly changing.
It's making me think about artists. One of the academic papers actually talks about how the artist really embodies this Übermensch spirit.
Oh, that's a great point.
What is it about artists that makes them so special in this context?
Well, think about what artists do. They break free from conventions, they create their own rules, their own aesthetic values, they embrace the challenge of shaping their own reality through their art.
Right.
And that aligns really well with Nietzsche's vision of the Übermensch.
And wasn't Nietzsche himself kind of an example of this?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, he saw himself as a product of his time. He called himself a decadent, but he was fighting against those tendencies through his work.
100%. He saw decadence as a cultural phenomenon, right? Okay. Marked by this decline in values and a sense of pessimism. But he believed that by embracing individuality, creativity, this pursuit of self-overcoming, Individuals could transcend their time, like an artist creates beauty out of chaos.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
But this is where things get really interesting. Because now we've got another philosopher entering the chat, Martin Heidegger.
Yeah.
And he's got some, let's say, strong opinions about Nietzsche's whole idea.
Heidegger, oh yeah, he was massively influenced by Nietzsche, but he also had his own take on things.
And his take was?
Well, Heidegger argued that despite Nietzsche's intentions, the Übermensch might still be a transcendent ideal. In other words, something beyond this world, unattainable in a practical sense.
So is the Übermensch something we can realistically strive for here and now? Or is it just this beautiful, impossible dream?
That is the million-dollar question, right? And it's the one that sparked endless debate. One of your sources even suggests that the Übermensch is, get this, a kind of mask.
A mask.
A mask that Nietzsche uses to project his own desires and aspirations.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. I feel like we're just scratching the surface here.
A mask. It's a pretty provocative idea, right?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if Nietzsche truly believed we could reach this Übermensch state. Or if it was more of a, I don't know, a thought experiment.
Yeah.
A way to push us to think differently about human potential.
Because, let's be honest, some of Nietzsche's writing can feel a bit, elitist.
Right.
Like, he's saying the Übermensch is at the top of this hierarchy, and everyone else is stuck below.
I get that. It's a common critique.
Yeah.
But one of the academic papers you sent, it actually offers a different perspective. It argues that Nietzsche wasn't advocating for this literal hierarchy of superhumans versus everyone else.
Okay.
The Übermensch, they say, is more like a symbol.
Symbol of what?
Of human potential.
Yeah.
A goal that anyone, regardless of their background or social standing, can strive for.
So it's not about creating some kind of Nietzschean master race, but about individual self-realization.
Exactly. It's about pushing the boundaries of what it means to be human, not creating a separate class of superior beings.
Okay, I see that. But what about Nietzsche's famous will to power?
Yes.
Doesn't that imply some kind of dominance, like striving for superiority over others?
The will to power. It's one of Nietzsche's most misunderstood concepts, for sure. And actually, all your sources touch on this. It's not about dominating others or seeking political power. It's about something much more fundamental.
Okay, so what is it about?
A drive. A drive that's inherent in all living things.
Like a drive to what?
To grow. To overcome challenges. To express oneself fully.
So it's more about self-mastery than mastery over others.
Precisely. For Nietzsche, the will to power is a creative force. It's about self-actualization, pushing your limits, constantly expanding your horizons.
So like an artist striving to create a masterpiece.
Yes. Or an athlete pushing themselves to achieve peak performance. It's that internal fire, the drive to excel.
Okay, I'm following you. But if the Übermensch isn't about some kind of hierarchical dominance, then what's the point of striving for it?
Good question.
What's the payoff? What do we get out of it?
For Nietzsche, the pursuit of self-overcoming, that's its own reward. It's about embracing the fullness of life with all its joys and sorrows and creating meaning in a world that's often seen as meaningless.
Right.
Remember, he was writing at a time when those old religious answers were fading. He was trying to find a new source of meaning.
A new way to live a fulfilling life.
Yeah.
So it's about finding meaning in a world without God, right? About creating your own values, your own purpose, almost like becoming your own moral compass.
You got it. The Übermensch doesn't rely on external sources of meaning or morality. They forge their own path. They define their own values. They create their own destiny.
That's powerful stuff, but it's also kind of a lot of pressure. If we're all responsible for creating our own meaning, that can feel pretty overwhelming, right?
It can be, sure. But Nietzsche saw this as a liberating challenge, not a burden. He believed that by embracing our freedom, taking responsibility for our lives, we could achieve a level of self-realization that was previously unimaginable.
I can see that. Okay, I'm starting to see how this whole Übermensch thing, even if it's not a literal goal, can be a powerful source of inspiration.
It can be very inspiring.
It's about pushing ourselves to be better, to create, to find meaning in our own lives.
On our own terms.
Exactly. And Nietzsche believed that this pursuit, even if the Übermensch is ultimately unattainable, is essential. Essential for the flourishing of both individuals and society as a whole.
It is.
It's like that saying, shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars.
Exactly. The journey itself is just as important as the destination. But, you brought up a good point earlier about artists. Is there anyone else who embodies this spirit? Someone we could look to for inspiration?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. Give us some names.
Well, Nietzsche himself, He never actually identified any specific individuals as Übermenschen. He saw it as a future possibility, not something that had already been fully realized.
So it's more of an aspirational ideal than a historical figure?
Yes, but that doesn't mean we can't find inspiration in individuals who've demonstrated some of those Übermensch qualities. Exceptional courage, creativity, a willingness to challenge conventional thinking. Nietzsche himself was deeply inspired by figures like Goethe, the German writer and philosopher, and even Napoleon Bonaparte.
Napoleon, wow. He wasn't exactly known for his humility, was he?
That's true. And it's important to remember, Nietzsche's views were often controversial, open to multiple interpretations. But he saw in figures like Goethe and Napoleon this powerful will to power, an ability to shape their own destinies. And that resonated with him.
Right. I can see that. Both Goethe and Napoleon, they definitely left their mark on history. But I'm guessing there are some who would say that glorifying figures like Napoleon, a military conqueror, is a bit dangerous, right?
Of course. And it's crucial to engage with Nietzsche's work critically, recognize both its strengths and its limitations.
So we shouldn't just blindly accept everything he said.
Absolutely not.
It's about taking the good and leaving the bad.
Exactly. We can appreciate Nietzsche's insights into the human condition, his emphasis on self-overcoming and creating meaning, without necessarily subscribing to all of his conclusions or endorsing his sometimes provocative rhetoric.
Right. So we've talked about how the Übermensch is complex, it's multifaceted, but how does all this relate to us today? How can we apply these ideas to our own lives in the 21st century?
That's the key question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to the heart of what makes Nietzsche so relevant today. So we're kind of living in this Nietzschean moment.
Without even realizing it.
Right. Kind of wild when you think about it. And it makes his ideas even more powerful. Like that whole thing about self-reliance, about creating meaning instead of just consuming it. It's like more relevant than ever. One of the sources even called it a manual for navigating chaos, which I love.
I like that. But how do we actually do that?
Right.
Because sometimes Nietzsche can get a little, abstract.
He can. That's where those three transformations, the camel, lion, child thing, it actually becomes really practical.
Okay.
It's about asking yourself, what burdens are you carrying? What's holding you back?
Right.
Which conventions need to be, challenged, maybe even roared at a little.
Yeah, I like that. And then tapping into that childlike energy to actually build something new.
Exactly. What is it that makes you feel alive? What brings that sense of wonder, that playfulness to your work, your relationships, even to just the everyday stuff,
Right.
Nietzsche thought those were clues, like clues to your own unique path.
But let's be real for a second.
Okay.
Life is messy. Work stress, family drama, the constant pressure of social media.
Yeah.
How are we supposed to find the energy for all this self-overcoming stuff?
That's a really good point. And, Nietzsche wasn't saying we should all go live in a cave and ignore reality. He knew life was messy. But this is where intention comes in.
Intention?
Yeah. One of your papers compares it to an athlete training for a competition. The struggle is part of the process. It makes them stronger.
So it's about turning those everyday frustrations, like those little annoyances, into fuel for the Übermensch engine.
Exactly. Even Nietzsche himself struggled with this. We see it in his personal notes.
Right.
He wasn't some superhuman figure, just floating above it all. He was in the trenches, figuring it out as he went, which I find really encouraging.
Me too, actually. It makes it feel more attainable. Okay, if Nietzsche can wrestle with these ideas, maybe I can too.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not alone in this. Remember that line from Thus Spoke Zarathustra? Man is a rope, tied between beast and Übermensch. We're all on that rope, trying to climb higher.
Such a powerful image. So even if we never fully embody the Übermensch, the act of striving, the journey itself, that's what changes us.
That's the point. We might not reach some ultimate destination, but we become more resilient, more creative, more authentically ourselves along the way.
Yeah.
And that's a victory in itself.
I love that. It kind of takes the pressure off, Like we don't have to reach some perfect state. It's more about the process, the continual growth.
Exactly. It's about embracing the challenge, even the struggle, and finding meaning in that striving. And ultimately, I think that's what makes Nietzsche's work so valuable, even for those of us who aren't, philosophers or artists.
Right.
It gives us a framework for living a more fulfilling, meaningful life on our own terms.
So even though the Übermensch might be a complex idea, even a controversial one, there's some real wisdom there.
Definitely.
It's about finding that inner strength, that creative spark, and using it to shape our own reality.
Even amidst all the craziness of the modern world.
Exactly. And that's what these deep dives are all about. Extracting those little golden nuggets from all the research you guys do and helping make sense of it all.
That's what we do.
So as we wrap up, here's the question for all of you listening out there. What's one small step you can take today to embrace that Übermensch spirit? Maybe it's finally tackling that project you've been putting off, or having a tough but honest conversation with someone.
Or maybe it's just allowing yourself to be a little more playful.
Right.
A little more curious. A little more childlike in how you approach the world. Who knows what you might discover.
That's all for this deep dive into Nietzsche's Übermensch. We hope you found it insightful. And until next time, keep pushing those boundaries, keep striving, and see what amazing things you can